His brother just bought a beautiful Audi A8. It only cost $80,000. My mother whispered excitedly in my ear, just as the priest was asking if I took my bride to be my wife. There I stood in my immaculate black tuxedo, holding the hands of the woman I had loved for 6 years, at the altar of Oak Ridge Methodist Church in Tennessee, with 200 guests watching us in respectful silence. And my parents chose that sacred moment to talk about my younger brother. "It's a red convertible with a beige leather interior," my father added in a low voice, leaning forward from the front pew. "He said he's going to take us out to dinner next weekend." I felt Ashley's hands tighten slightly. She had noticed the interruption, as had half the guests who were close enough to hear. The priest looked at me expectantly, waiting for my response to take this woman. It was at that moment that something inside me simply broke. It wasn't anger. It was a crystal-clear clarity that cut through 28 years of being the second choice in my own family. I gently released Ashley's hands and turned to my parents. "I'm so glad Derek got a new car," I said, my voice echoing through the priest's microphone and filling the silence of the church. "Especially considering you just used the money you promised for our honeymoon to buy him this present." The silence that followed was deafening. "My name is Jordan, I'm 28 years old, and I just found out at the altar of my own wedding that my parents have been lying to me for 6 months about our trip to Italy." The look of horror on my mother's face told me everything I needed to know. The way my father looked away confirmed every suspicion I had tried to ignore over the past few weeks. $20,000. That was what they had promised as a wedding gift. A dream honeymoon that Ashley and I had been planning since we got engaged. $20,000 that apparently was more necessary for my 23-year-old brother's third car. Derek, who had been living in my parents' basement for 2 years, who had never held a job for more than 6 months, who had crashed 2 previous cars while driving drunk. Derek, who had always been the baby of the family, the talented one, the one who just needed a chance. And me? I was the responsible one. The one who graduated with an engineering degree, who paid his own bills since he was 18, who never asked for anything other than to be treated like an equal son. Ashley looked at me with a mixture of shock and something that looked like pride. Whispers began to spread through the pews like waves. "You think I wouldn't find out?" I continued, my voice still calm, still amplified. "You think I wouldn't notice when Derek posted pictures of his new car on Instagram last night, thanking you for the early birthday present?" My mother tried to stand up, but I raised my hand. "Stay seated. I'm not finished yet." The priest was petrified, holding the prayer book like a shield. "For 6 months, you looked me in the eye and lied. 6 months of pretending you were excited about our honeymoon, that it was your special gift to us, that you wanted us to start our life together in the best way possible." I could see some of the guests whispering to each other, others simply speechless. "And what did you do when Derek decided he wanted a new car?" "You took our money and gave it to him. No discussion. No explanation. You didn't even have the decency to tell us before our wedding." Ashley squeezed my arm gently. When I looked at her, I saw no judgment, only support. That look that said, "It's time for you to speak your truth." "You know what the saddest part is?" I asked, my voice finally carrying the emotion I had been holding back. "I would have understood if you had been honest. If you had said that Derek was going through a rough patch, that you needed to help him, that you couldn't afford our trip." Tears began to stream down my mother's face, but they weren't tears of regret. They were tears of embarrassment at being exposed in public. "But instead, you chose to treat me the way you always have. As if I were too strong to need consideration, too responsible to deserve priority, too mature to have feelings that matter." I turned back to Ashley, taking her hands. "I accept this woman," I said to the priest, who was still in shock. "And I promise her, here in front of all of you, that our family will be built on honesty, mutual respect, and the certainty that we will never put anyone second." If you're enjoying this story about how sometimes it's necessary to expose the truth at the most unexpected moment, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Because you haven't seen anything yet. What my parents did next was even worse than lying about the money. And my response? Well, let's just say that some bridges were burned for good that day. What happened after I spoke was controlled chaos. My mother finally stood up, her legs shaking visibly. "Jordan, honey, you're making a scene," she whispered urgently, trying to keep her voice down, but the microphone still picked up every word. "We can talk about this after the ceremony." "After the ceremony?" I repeated, a bitter laugh escaping me. How are we going to talk about the $15,000 you promised for the reception buffet? Or did that money go into fuel for Derek's Audi too? I saw Ashley press her lips together, trying not to smile. She knew I was just getting started. My father, ever the diplomat, tried to stand up to calm me down. Son, you're misreading this. Derek's going through a tough time. Tough time. My voice echoed through the church. Dad, Derek is 23 years old, has never held a job for more than 6 months, and you just bought him his 3rd car in 2 years. What kind of tough time is that? That's when Derek showed up. He had been in the parking lot, probably smoking with his cousins, and came running in when he heard the commotion. Still wearing a rented suit that cost more than Ashley's dress, Derek stopped at the end of the aisle, his eyes widening when he realized what was going on. "Hey man," he said, his voice carrying the typical arrogance that made me want to break something. "Why are you causing drama at your own wedding?" The audacity of that question made something inside me snap. Drama. I turned to face him, my voice now carrying all the frustration that had built up over the years. "Derek, you want to know what the real drama is?" I took a few steps toward him, Ashley instinctively following me. "The drama is that for the last 2 years, you've spent over $70,000 supporting her lifestyle." $70,000, Derek. Cars, traffic tickets, lawyers for your bar fights, the rent on the apartment you destroyed, the 3 times you paid her credit card bills. Derek tried to interrupt, but I raised my hand. And during all that time, Ashley and I saved every penny for our wedding. We worked extra weekends, canceled vacations, sold furniture, also we could pay for our own party without asking you for a penny. My voice was getting stronger, more controlled. The only thing you offered to pay for was our honeymoon. And you made a point of repeating that for months. Don't worry about the trip, it's our special gift to you. We want you to start your married life off right. Ashley squeezed my arm again, this time tightly, reminding me that I wasn't alone in this. And then a week ago when I tried to confirm the trip details, Mom told me that maybe it would be better to postpone it until next year, until things settled down financially. I looked directly at my mother, who now had tears streaming down her face. But the problem wasn't money, it was priority. Derek wanted a new car, and as always, what Derek wants, Derek gets. Derek finally found his voice. "Man, this is ridiculous. I needed that car for work." The laugh that came out of me was dry and cutting. "Work? Derek, you got fired from your job last month. Again. And before that, you missed so much work that they were considering firing you even before you showed up drunk to Monday's meeting." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the small children seemed to feel the tension. "What you don't understand," I continued, my voice now calmer but infinitely more dangerous, "is that I know everything. I know about the loans you took out to cover his debts. I know about the reverse mortgage you took out on Grandma's house last year. I know about the credit cards in Dad's name that are maxed out." I saw my father pale. He didn't know I'd found out about the cards. "And you know how I found out all this? Because 6 months ago, when I realized you were being weird about our honeymoon, I hired a private investigator." The shock of this revelation was visible. Ashley looked at me in surprise. She didn't know this part. Mike Santos, ex-cop, financial investigator. It cost me $2,000, but it was worth every penny. Because now I know exactly how much you've spent on Derek over the last 5 years. I pulled an envelope from the inside pocket of my tuxedo. I'd been carrying this information around for weeks, waiting for the right moment to use it. $142,000. In 5 years. Cars, lawyers, rent, debts, loans that were never paid back, rehab treatment he walked out on 3 times. Derek tried to step closer, but stopped when he saw my expression. "And during those same 5 years, you asked me to lend you money 7 times. 7. For emergencies that I later found out were always related to Derek's problems." Ashley whispered something in my ear, but I shook my head. "He wasn't finished yet. The funny part," he said, putting the envelope back in his pocket, "is that you think you're loving parents. You think you're helping Derek. But in reality, you're slowly killing him." Now it was Derek who turned pale. Because every time you solve a problem for him, every time you pay a debt or buy a new car, you take away his chance to grow up. To learn. To become a real man. I turned to the guests, who were hanging on my every word. And me? I became the invisible son. The responsible one. The one who never needed help because he always got by on his own. The one who never caused trouble because he always solved his own problems. My voice broke slightly, but I continued. But you know what the truth is? Sometimes I needed help too. Sometimes I wanted to feel like I was a priority to my parents. Ashley wiped a tear from her own face. And today, on what should be the most important day of my life, you chose to talk about Derek's new car while I was saying my wedding vows. The silence was now deafening. So that's it, I said, taking Ashley's hands again. Ashley, do you still want to marry me? Because if you do, let's finish this ceremony. And then we'll go on our honeymoon, which will pay for ourselves, like we've always done with everything else in our lives. Ashley smiled through her tears. Of course I want to marry you. I turned to the priest, who was still in shock. Can we continue? But that's when Derek did the most Derek thing possible. He laughed. A loud, mocking laugh that cut through the air like a knife. Man, you're being so dramatic. It's just money. And with that sentence, everything changed. Because in that moment, I made a decision that would change our family forever. It's just money. Those 3 words echoed through the church like a gunshot. Ashley let out an audible sigh. Some guests whispered indignantly. Even the priest shook his head in disbelief. But me? I smiled. It was a cold, calculated smile that made Derek instinctively take a step back. It's just money, I repeated, my voice amplified by the microphone. Derek, you just summed up our family's problem perfectly in 3 words. I walked toward him, Ashley following me with renewed confidence. For you, it's always been about money. The money that paid for your cars. The money that covered your fines. The money that paid for your lawyers when you assaulted that bar security guard last year. I saw my mother try to interrupt me, but I raised my hand again. But for me and Ashley, it wasn't just money. It was sacrifice. It was saving every penny for 2 years. It was the difference between having a dream honeymoon or spending our first week of marriage working to pay the bills that piled up while we planned this party. Derek crossed his arms, that smug smile still on his face. Man, you're gonna cry over a trip? You can travel anytime. And that's when something inside me broke for good. Anytime. My voice rose an octave. Derek, do you have any idea how many times Ashley and I have postponed our honeymoon waiting for any time? I turned to the guests, many of whom knew our story. 3 years, people. 3 years of putting off our engagement trip because Derek was going through a rough patch. 2 years of saving for the wedding because Derek needed help with his debt. And now on our wedding day, we find out that our gifts were used to buy his 3rd car. Ashley stepped up to the microphone. Her voice was calm but charged with contained emotion. You know what hurts the most, Derek? It's not the money. It's the lie. Jordan and I have been working double shifts for the last 6 months to pay for everything ourselves, specifically so we wouldn't be a burden on our families. She looked directly at my parents. The only thing we accepted as help was the honeymoon. Because you insisted. Because you said it was important to you to contribute something special. My mother finally found her voice. Ashley, honey, you're misreading this. We just... Lying, Ashley interrupted, her voice still polite but firm. You're lying right now, just like you've been lying for the past 6 months. That's when our maid of honor Karen, Ashley's best friend since college, stood up in the 3rd pew. Excuse me, she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who works as a prosecutor. But I think everyone here needs to hear something important. Karen walked down the center aisle, her heels echoing in the absolute silence. Ashley told me about the canceled honeymoon last week. And as a family law attorney, I was curious about something. She looked directly at my parents. So I did some public research. Property records, credit history, that sort of thing. I felt my stomach tighten. Karen hadn't told me about this. And I found out that you took out a second loan on the house 3 months ago. $50,000. The silence was now deafening. $50,000 that, according to bank records I was able to legally access, was used in 4 transactions, $20,000 to the Mercedes dealership, $15,000 to cover credit card debt in Derek Williams' name, $10,000 transferred to Derek's personal account, and $5,000 in cash that was withdrawn on the same day the car was purchased. My mother was as pale as a ghost. So when you said you couldn't afford the honeymoon due to financial difficulties, you actually just went into debt for $50,000 to give money to Derek. Derek tried to speak, but Karen silenced him with a look. And here's the interesting part, Derek. As a prosecutor, I see many cases of adults who never learned responsibility because their parents always protected them from the consequences. And you? You're a classic case. She turned to the guests. Did you know that Derek has 3 outstanding arrest warrants in other states? 2 for drunk driving and 1 for assault. I didn't know that. Judging by the shocked expressions on my parents' faces, neither did they. And you know how I found out? Because yesterday, when Ashley told me about the canceled honeymoon, I decided to do a full background check on everyone involved. It's what we do when something doesn't make sense. Derek was visibly nervous now. Karen, my mother tried to intervene. This is a family matter. No, Mrs. Williams. It became my business when my best friend was hurt by you. And as a witness to this marriage, I have a moral obligation to ensure that Ashley knows exactly what kind of family she's marrying into. Ashley squeezed my hand tightly. For the first time since this whole thing started, I felt like I wasn't alone in this fight. But here's the best part, Karen continued, a professional smile crossing her face. Jordan, you mentioned you hired a private investigator. Mike Santos, right? I nodded, confused as to where she was going with this. Mike is my ex-brother-in-law. And when he showed me the report he prepared for you 3 weeks ago, we discovered something interesting. She pulled a folder from her purse. Derek, do you remember signing some documents as co-signer for your parents 2 years ago? Derek paled. Documents you probably didn't even read because you were trusting your parents to take care of everything? Karen, where are you going with this? I asked. I'm getting to the fact that Derek is legally responsible for 50% of all the debt his parents have incurred over the last 2 years, including the $50,000 loan they just took out. Derek looked like he was about to throw up. And considering that Derek doesn't have a steady job, has terrible credit, and has outstanding warrants, when the creditors come after the money. Ashley whispered, "Oh my God," next to me. They'll go after his parents' property first. And if that's not enough, they'll go after any assets Derek owns, including the red Audi parked outside. The irony was delicious. Derek had used our money to buy a car he would probably lose in a few months when the creditors came after him. So Derek, Karen said, closing the folder, you're right. It's just money. Money you owe and will be charged compound interest on very soon. That was the moment everything changed inside me. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about justice. It was about finally exposing a pattern of behavior that had destroyed our family for years. Karen, thank you for that information, I said, my voice now completely calm. But there's something neither you nor Mike have discovered. I looked directly at Derek. Something I discovered on my own 2 weeks ago that will change everything. Ashley looked at me curiously. Even Karen seemed intrigued. Derek, do you want to tell everyone about your secret bank account in the Cayman Islands? Or would you rather I tell them? The silence that followed was absolutely deafening. Because what no one knew, not my parents, not Karen, not Ashley, was that I had discovered that Derek wasn't just irresponsible. He was a criminal. And the evidence I had in my possession would not only destroy his life, but send him to prison for a very, very long time. The color drained from Derek's face. I don't know what you're talking about, he stammered, but his trembling voice gave him away. You don't? I asked, my voice still calm, but now laden with an authority that silenced the entire church. Derek, account number 237859114 at the Cayman International Bank. Opened on March 15th of last year. Current balance, $167,000. Ashley whispered my God beside me. How did you, Derek began, but stopped abruptly, realizing he had just incriminated himself. How did I know? I smiled coldly. Derek, did you really think you could hide $167,000 from me? I turned to the guests, many of whom were gaping. For the past 2 years, while Derek was unemployed and going through hard times, he was operating a money laundering scheme through shell companies. Karen approached, her professional expression replaced by genuine surprise. "Jordan, this is very serious. If you have evidence." "I have all the evidence," I said, tapping my tuxedo's inside pocket. "Wire transfers, fake corporate documents, email communications, photographs, audio recordings." My parents were completely paralyzed. The reality of the situation had finally sunk in. "Derek isn't just irresponsible," I continued, my voice now projecting clearly throughout the church. "He's an active criminal. And you, unbeknownst to you, are being used as a shield for his illegal operations." Derek tried to take a step toward the exit, but I raised my hand. "You're not going anywhere, Derek. Not until we've finished this conversation." It was at that moment that I revealed how I had found out everything. 3 months ago, when you first canceled our honeymoon, I hired Mike Santos to do more than just look into the family finances. I asked him to do a complete background check on Derek. I looked directly at my brother, who was now visibly sweating. And Mike found something interesting. Derek has a spending pattern that doesn't match his reported income. Expensive cars, designer clothes, trips he didn't post on social media. Ashley squeezed my arm, realizing the depth of what I had discovered. So Mike did what any good investigator would do. He followed the money. I pulled out my phone and showed a photo on the screen to the guests closest to me. This is a photo of Derek leaving an accounting office in Miami 6 weeks ago. The same office that's being investigated by the FBI for money laundering for drug cartels. The silence was now absolute. Even the children seemed to sense the gravity of the situation. "Derek, do you want to tell everyone about your consulting firm? Or would you rather I explain how you were using fake documents in our parents' names to open corporate accounts?" My mother finally found her voice. "Jordan, this can't be true." "Mom," I said softly, "Derek used your social security number to open 3 different companies in the last 18 months. Companies that received transfers of over $400,000 from questionable sources." Derek finally exploded. "You don't know anything. You've always been the perfect son, always judging everyone else." "I'm judging." My voice rose slightly. "Derek, you're putting our parents at risk of federal investigation. You're using our family as a shield for criminal activity." I turned to the guests. "And you know what's ironic? While Derek was making dirty money and hiding it in offshore accounts, my parents were going into debt to help him because they thought he was struggling financially." Ashley whispered something in my ear, but I shook my head. I wasn't finished yet. 2 weeks ago, when I finally put all the pieces together, I made a decision. I looked directly at Derek. I called the FBI. The impact of that revelation was like a bolt of lightning. Derek staggered backward, my mother let out a muffled scream, and my father rose instinctively. Special Agent Jennifer Morrison from the Financial Crimes Division. She was very interested in the information I had. Derek tried to speak, but his voice wouldn't come out. "And you know what Agent Morrison told me? That they'd been investigating the companies associated with Derek for 6 months. That I'd given them exactly the evidence they needed to close the case." Karen moved closer again. "Jordan, if this is true, Derek could face federal charges. 15 to 20 years in federal prison," I confirmed. "Money laundering, bank fraud, use of false documents." Derek finally found his voice. You turned me in to the FBI?" "No, Derek. You turned yourself in when you decided to use our family as a shield for your criminal activities. If you're following this family drama, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to see how this story ends. But here's the most interesting part," I continued, a cold smile crossing my face. "Agent Morrison told me that if I cooperated fully with the investigation, our family could avoid any charges of complicity." My parents looked at me with a mixture of relief and horror. So I made a deal with them. In exchange for my full cooperation, my parents would be classified as victims rather than accomplices. Derek was now completely pale. You can't." "I already did, Derek. The arrest warrants were issued yesterday." It was at that moment that 3 men in suits silently entered the church through the back. "And these are Special Agents Morrison, Garcia, and Thompson of the FBI." Derek tried to run, but he didn't even make it to the door before he was intercepted. "Derek Williams," said Agent Morrison, showing her badge, You're under arrest for money laundering, bank fraud, and use of forged federal documents." The chaos that ensued was indescribable. Guests stood up, murmurs grew, cell phone cameras appeared. But I remained completely calm at the altar, holding Ashley's hands. "Father," I said politely, "can we continue with the ceremony now?" What happened in the next few minutes was cinematic. Derek tried to resist arrest, shouting about injustice and family conspiracy, but FBI agents are trained to deal with criminals far more dangerous than a spoiled 23-year-old. "You have the right to remain silent," Agent Morrison recited calmly as Derek was handcuffed. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in court." My parents were in a state of absolute shock. My mother had collapsed in the pew, sobbing uncontrollably, while my father tried to process the reality that his youngest son was a federal criminal. Ashley squeezed my hand tightly. "Jordan, how did you find out about all this?" That's when I revealed the most impressive part of my plan. "Ashley, remember when I told you I was working extra shifts on the weekends 6 months ago?" She nodded, still processing everything. I wasn't working. I was following Derek. The silence in the church was absolute. All the guests were absorbing every word. For 6 months, every time Derek said he was looking for a job or at interviews, I followed him. I photographed every encounter, recorded conversations, documented his every move. I pulled out my phone and showed a photo to Ashley and the guests standing nearby. "This is Derek leaving a money laundering office in Miami. This is him receiving an envelope of cash from a man who was arrested last week for drug trafficking. This is him depositing checks in the name of companies that don't exist." Derek, now handcuffed, tried to speak. "Jordan, you don't understand. I didn't know that." "You didn't know you were committing federal crimes?" I cut him off. "Derek, you have a college degree. You know exactly what you were doing." I turned to the guests. "But what you don't know yet is how Derek managed to get our parents involved in all this." Agent Morrison approached. "Mr. Williams, can we continue this conversation at the station?" "Actually, Agent Morrison, I think our family and friends deserve to know the whole truth before Derek is taken away." She nodded, understanding that this was part of our cooperation agreement. Derek didn't just use our parents' documents to set up fake companies. He also forged their signatures on contracts that made them legally responsible for debts of over $200,000. My father turned pale. $200,000? "Dad, Derek signed you as co-signers on loans he never intended to pay back. If I hadn't reported him to the FBI, you would have lost your house, your car, and you would have been in debt to the bank for the rest of your lives." Reality finally hit my parents. They weren't just victims of a lie about a honeymoon. They were victims of an elaborate criminal scheme. Derek finally exploded. "You destroyed our family. You betrayed me." That's when something inside me snapped. "I betrayed you?" My voice echoed through the church with a force that silenced everyone. "Derek, you used our family as a shield for criminal activities. You put our parents at risk of federal investigation. You lied, manipulated, and stole from all of us for years." I walked toward him, even with the agents between us. "And when I finally found out everything and tried to protect our family, you call that betrayal?" I stopped right in front of him. "Derek, the only betrayal here was you betraying the trust of people who loved you unconditionally. You betrayed parents who sacrificed themselves for you for years. You betrayed a brother who always stood up for you, even when you didn't deserve it." Tears were streaming down my face now, but my voice remained steady. "And you know what the saddest part is? Until this moment, until this conversation, I still had hope that you would take responsibility for your actions. That you would show some remorse. That you cared about what you did to our family." Derek looked away. "But instead, here you are, handcuffed for federal crimes, blaming everyone but yourself." Then Derek did something no one expected. He laughed. A bitter, broken laugh. "You've always been the perfect son, Jordan. Always doing everything right, always being responsible. You think you're better than me." "No, Derek. I never thought I was better than you. I just wanted you to be better for yourself." Agent Morrison approached again. "We need to go now." But before Derek was led away, he looked directly at me. "You're going to regret this. When I get out of prison." Derek, I cut him off, my voice now completely calm. You won't be out of prison for very long. The evidence I turned over to the FBI includes transactions dating back 3 years. With the federal charges you're facing, you're looking at 15 to 20 years. The impact of that reality finally hit Derek. He stopped fighting the handcuffs. And when you get out, I continued, I hope you're a different person. That you've learned that actions have consequences. That you've grown up enough to take responsibility for your own life. Derek was led away in silence, escorted by agents down the aisles of the church. The silence that followed his departure was profound. Ashley approached and held my face in both hands. Jordan, why didn't you tell me about the investigation? Because I needed to be sure. And because if something went wrong, I didn't want you to be affected. My parents approached, both visibly shaken. Jordan, my mother said through tears, we didn't know. We really didn't know what Derek was doing. I know, Mom. That's why I cooperated with the FBI to ensure that you were classified as victims, not accomplices. My father hugged me for the first time in years. You saved our family. No, Dad. I saved what's left of it. I turned to the guests, who were still processing everything they had witnessed. Everyone, I know this isn't the wedding anyone expected. But Ashley and I would very much like to continue our ceremony, if you're willing to stay. Karen stood up and began to clap. Soon, the entire church was applauding. The priest, who had remained silent throughout the drama, finally found his voice. In 40 years of performing weddings, I've never witnessed anything like this. But if you're ready to continue, so am I. Ashley smiled through her tears. We're ready. Well then, said the priest, where were we? Well then, said the priest, adjusting his glasses and resuming his position, where were we? Ashley laughed through her tears. At the part where you say, take this woman. Oh yes. He smiled. Jordan, do you take Ashley as your lawful wife, to love and honor her, in joy and in sorrow, in sickness and in health, until death do you part? I looked into her eyes, seeing not only love, but respect. Respect for someone who had finally stood up for her truth. I do. Ashley, do you take Jordan as your lawful husband? I do, she interrupted before he could finish. I definitely do. The kiss that followed was unlike any we had ever shared. It wasn't just romance, it was liberation. It was the beginning of a life built on complete honesty. The applause from the church was deafening. Karen was crying and clapping at the same time. My parents hugged each other, still processing everything that had happened. The reception that followed was unlike any wedding anyone had ever attended. Instead of small talk about the weather, guests talked about courage. About the importance of confronting the truth, even when it hurts. About how sometimes protecting a family means exposing its most painful secrets. My Aunt Margaret, who has always been the most outspoken member of the family, pulled me aside during the first dance. Jordan, in 62 years, I've never seen anything like what you did today, she said, holding my arm. You saved this family from a much worse implosion. Aunt Margaret, I didn't want it to come to this. Honey, she interrupted me, you didn't create this situation. You were just brave enough to expose it when it mattered. During the reception, I received messages from distant relatives who had watched everything unfold. Cousins I hadn't seen in years congratulated me not only on the wedding, but on my courage. My parents approached Ashley and me as we were cutting the cake. Jordan, my mother said, her voice still shaky, we need to talk about all this. About how we got to this point. We do, Mom. But not today. Today is about starting over. About building something based on truth. My father nodded. You're right. And we want to be part of rebuilding, if you'll let us. It was Ashley who answered. Of course we'll let you. But there's one condition, no secrets. No lies. No protecting someone at the expense of hurting someone else. 3 weeks after the wedding, we received a letter from the federal prison. Derek had written to apologize. It wasn't the apology we expected. It still had undertones of self-pity and justification. But it was a start. I didn't understand what I was doing to my family, he had written. I thought you would always be there, no matter what I did. Only now do I realize how much I hurt you all. Ashley suggested we not respond right away. Let him process the situation a little more. When he's really ready to take full responsibility, he won't need to explain his motivations to us. Agent Morrison updated us on the case 6 months later. Derek had decided to cooperate fully with the investigation, providing information that helped dismantle a larger money laundering ring. Your decision to report him probably saved many other families from being used in the same way, she told us. And his cooperation means he may get a reduced sentence, perhaps 8 to 10 years instead of 15 to 20. My parents were relieved by the news, but I felt something more complex. It wasn't satisfaction at his punishment, nor relief at his cooperation. It was a deep understanding that sometimes true love requires impossible decisions. A year after the wedding, Ashley and I finally took our honeymoon to Italy. We paid for every penny ourselves, as we had always planned. On our last night in Rome, sitting in a cafe near the Colosseum, Ashley asked me a question I had been expecting. Do you regret exposing Derek at our wedding? I thought for a long moment, watching the tourists passing by on the brightly lit streets. I don't regret telling the truth. But I do regret not finding a way to do it before it got to that point. Do you think he would have stopped if you had talked to him first? Honestly? No. Derek only understood the consequences when they became real. All the talking in the world wouldn't have replaced the experience of being arrested. Ashley took my hand. You saved your parents from losing everything. You saved other families from going through the same thing. And you showed me that it's possible to be loyal to your family without being complicit in destructive behavior. 2 years later, Derek was released on parole for good behavior and exemplary cooperation. He moved to a small town in Oregon, where he got a job at a mechanic's shop. He called me on our 3rd wedding anniversary. Jordan, his voice sounded different, more mature, less arrogant. I know I don't have the right to ask for anything, but I'd like to try to rebuild our relationship. Not the way it was before, but something new, based on honesty. Derek, I would be honored to have a real brother, I replied. But we need to take it slow. One step at a time. I understand. And Jordan? Thank you for saving me from myself. I know it didn't seem like it at the time, but you gave me the chance to become a better person. Today, 5 years after that dramatic wedding, our family is smaller but infinitely stronger. Derek and I talk once a month. He's never asked me for money again, never lied about his situation, and is slowly rebuilding the trust he broke. My parents have learned to provide emotional support instead of always solving problems financially. They now visit us regularly, and our conversations are about life, dreams, and joys, not crises and drama. Ashley is pregnant with our first child. We have decided that we will raise him knowing that true love sometimes means saying no, setting boundaries, and allowing people to face the consequences of their choices. If you've made it this far in this story about how the truth sometimes needs to explode to be heard, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. We have many more stories about families who have discovered that honesty hurts less than lies. Because in the end, I've learned that protecting someone from the consequences of their actions isn't love, it's fear. Fear of conflict, fear of change, fear that we won't survive the truth. But the truth is, real families, real relationships, real love, all of that can only exist in the light of complete honesty. Derek tried to destroy our family with his lies and crimes. But in the process of exposing him, we discovered something we never had before, a family based on truth, mutual respect, and the certainty that we can trust each other. And that, in the end, was worth every tear, every moment of pain, every second of that dramatic wedding that changed our lives forever. The last time I saw Derek, he was helping a neighbor family fix their roof after a storm. He wasn't getting paid, he just wanted to help. Me? Well, I was watching my pregnant wife plant flowers in the garden of our first home, bought with honestly earned money and truly earned love.